Kia ora, Annabell Ahuriri-Driscoll, calling in from Christchurch at the moment, involved in the abuse of state care and faith-based care apology process. Thank you very much for joining us. Great to have you here. First question for you, I guess for me, I'm very curious to know what the process has been like for you guys from the perspective of what you bring to the whole thing, because it's not a small undertaking.
No, you mean to apology specifically?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, well, because there's obviously still a little bit to go as well with the redress process, which, we've heard that, they're going to update things and the system's going to be, but there hasn't been much in the way of specifics yet by the sounds of it. So there's obviously a lot that's still in play.
Yep, and will be for a while. I guess I was part of a group of my involvement in apology was as a Māori survivor. And I had the opportunity, along with others who had all been involved in different parts of, say, the Royal Commission, my case a little bit in that, but also in the redress design. And so there was sort of a collection of us that have been working with government across various strands. And I guess we brought some awareness of we need a voice. There's been a lot of work on the apology for quite some time, but mainly with a group of sort of tikanga experts actually that were advising the Crown. And a few of us as survivors said actually we'd really like to be connected with that group. We want to see a kind of a collaboration, I guess, of survivor voice and also that of our tohunga, our tikanga experts. And I think that speaks to, for many of us, part of our healing, I guess part of our survivor experience has been that deep disconnection from who we are, from our whānau, hapu, iwi, Māori communities. And so there are some conversations that need to be had this side of apology, between survivors. Our communities need to work out, what's their role in this. And so anyway, our involvement, facilitated, guided, supported by Te Atiawa was amazing, in that they decided, okay, this apology's happening in our rohe, in our area, so we're going to take leadership. We are going to turn up, we're going to show up, and I guess take responsibility for this having happened in our community. The various abuses in terms of sites and locations happening in our backyard, and this is something we need to come to terms with. So what they did is we were involved in a series of meetings. They, I guess, heard from us in various forms, our voices, and then incorporated those into the design of karakia, more tiatia, paranga that were going to be involved in the apology. And so it was a beautiful, we were made aware this is a tikanga process, which is sort of slightly separate but interwoven with the Crown apology. And so very meaningful to be able to be involved. Part of our own healing, I think, for many of us, being recognised for who we are as Māori, and how our journey as survivors is distinct but also shared with our whanaunga,
I know the apology itself, the media focuses on sort of what happens in the House with, Chris Hipkins, Christopher Luxon. There were also a range of apologies that came from sector service leaders as well for what had happened throughout their organisations. Were you guys involved in that part of the process as well? Was it sort of we identify what sectors were the ones that were causing the issues and this is where the apology needs to come from? Or was that something that came from sort of the government side of it?
Yeah, I guess, like I said, survivors have been involved in working with the Crown Response Unit in various ways, across apology, across records, across redress, in the Royal Commission. So I think survivors have, identified where the problems have been. That's been picked up by government, obviously, but no, as far as I understand, the apologies from chief executives was was sort of Crown managed, but with kind of that intelligence that has come from survivor voices.
Yeah, so what I really liked about the apology, being a disabled person, is that the kind of disabled element put in the legislation. Were you part of the group that talked to the Prime Minister, and if so, how receptive was he away from the cameras, not talking it, not taking into account the media spin sort of side of it?
Yeah, I guess a lot of this work has happened under the previous government. And so the work that I was involved in we were largely liaising with ministers of the previous government. But so I acknowledge that for this government coming in, the Royal Commission plus what's been done with redress, they have to pick that up. I think it's taken them quite some time to I think, come to sort of terms with that. So a little bit of a delay in terms of for our work around redress. A report completed in December, but Erica Stanford didn't receive that report until March this year. I think it would have been a little bit quicker if those previous ministers were still there. And so I think it has taken them. I think because they're a coalition government, there's all that sort of negotiation that needs to happen around this issue, as many others. And so I think it has taken them quite some time to work out, as a coalition government, where do they stand on this. There's always been calls, and I think there will be a degree of sort of cross-party agreement that this should be an issue. I guess for many of us, our feeling is this is an issue that should sit outside of the policies of the day. But I guess the likelihood of that is fairly slim. So I think Christopher Luxon, I've had very limited dealings with him. Our point of contact is Erica Stanford. She's been very positive, quite supportive, but there's a large cabinet that has to sort of end up being on the same page. My feeling is Christopher Luxon is supportive, but again, probably one step removed from the next steps.
So with that then, how did you feel about the apology on the day that he provided?
Yeah, I think because, the speech that he gave at the tabling of the Royal Commission report was really, many of us that were seated in the gallery, I think were quite, I don't think astounded is too strong a word, actually, at what we heard. It was probably the acknowledgement of the content of the report and the experience of survivors was at that point more than we could have imagined. So then I think coming to apology, probably hard to sort of top that in a way. I feel that the limitations of the national apology, in my mind, hugely important. It is symbolic, but also much more than that. It's about introducing survivor experiences into the public consciousness. And then, also from a tikanga point of view, having to do that, Crown having to acknowledge its part in those harms in order to move to the next stages. But I think perhaps there, because it's so broad, it did lack detail from my point of view. And there's been some interesting analysis of Christopher Luxon and Chris Hipkins' speeches talking about the key difference being, I guess it was felt that Chris Hipkins' speech, he was taking more responsibility for his role in governments and under which this abuse has happened. So I think that's possibly there was less of that in Christopher Luxon's speech.
Which brings me to my next question. Next comment rather. Some of the people felt that, and Mr. Luxon's speech in particular, that some of his comments were derogatory and old-fashioned towards disabled people. Did you feel that way yourself?
I must admit, I think on the day, I think the nature of the day, the intensity, I realized that listening to it, there are probably details I didn't pick up on. There was a lot to take in, I guess that's what I'm saying. But I'm interested in hearing that perspective. It doesn't surprise me. As an adopted person, I feel like there were details probably missing. Yeah, I don't know that I feel that our group is particularly well seen or recognised still, but yeah.
Well, speaking of adoption, I actually read something the morning of the apology, and I can't remember where it was, but it was a story that popped up about young mums who had their children taken off them without their permission. It was sort of basically, no, baby's gone and interstate care, and they never see it again. That they weren't included, I believe, in this report. Which shows that there's obviously a lot of other things, other factors going on out there, a lot of other actions going on out there that weren't covered necessarily under this report. How much worse is what's happening out there or happened out there than what people realise if they're just ingesting it through mainstream media?
For adoption specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a lot, and I think the enduring sort of battle we have as adopted people and birth mothers is, well, yeah, there are enduring kind of myths around adoption as being win-win, entirely positive. There's a real unwillingness, I think, from people to hear how that has harmed people. I think what our attention tends to go to is the obviously the blatantly wrong and abusive practices. So, for instance, a mother being coerced or finding that her baby is just all of a sudden gone. I think, though, there's an awful lot more out there that people possibly aren't aware of and don't really want to know about. And there's sort of a very there's a breadth of experience. I think in some of the work I've done, I've tried to highlight that the core harms around adoption exist regardless of whether you've had a good or a bad or abusive adoption. And that's what I'm driven with some of my other adopted peers, to make people aware of. But there were also many stories of adopted people who were adopted into abusive families. There were children that were adopted initially and then still end up in state care. So there's actually a variety of experiences. I would say every one of those features some level of harm. But we need to get better at thinking about what that harm looks and feels like. And I think that the thing that people struggle with is the role of the state in that. And so, there are adopted people who, are sort of told, you shouldn't be in this space. You weren't abused. This doesn't apply to you. I'd actually argue that it does.
So that raises a really interesting point for me. You mentioned that you were raised by Pākehā. You've obviously got a connection to your Māori side as well. That's something that is, from a really Eurocentric Pākehā perspective, some people don't understand that sort of connection that somebody has with their tupuna, with their with their family history. I'm kind of curious what your journey of discovery was on that, and how that could inform other people who might be in the same situation.
So I think, well, the other thing I do that I've done quite a bit of research looking at the sort of this point in time in the 50s and 60s when closed adoption was introduced, and also numbers of children funneled into state care really escalated. And the common thing across those two sort of trajectories is assimilation and the assimilationist policies, which maintained that it was advantageous for Māori to kind of, vis-a-vis the Hun report, cease to be Māori apart from some vestigial or ceremonial aspects. It was believed that, and I think many of our whānau believed that that was the way that, the better way, say for somebody like myself, was to be adopted into a European family. And clearly, we've shifted, thank goodness. We recognise that actually everybody has a right to be themselves, to honour their whakapapa, to have all of those connections. So, but I grew up in 1980s Christchurch with very little Māori influence, input into my life at all, nothing at school, and also haunted by the fraction that social welfare had given me, and kind of the mathematics that had been done around working out my father's fraction. And also, obviously, how I looked. So, adopted children were categorised according to their racial markers. And then we were kind of.
No idea. That's horrifying.
It absolutely happened. Anne Else has done some research. Sort of, babies were coded as black, referred to as baby black. Others, probably like myself, coded as pink or white, and therefore more desirable because we could pass as non-Māori. My own parents were asked if they were happy taking a different child, a child, who's part Māori. They said yes to that, and then they adopted my sister later, who has Tongan whakapapa. So who we were as Māori or racial beings was very much part of how we were in that market, and whether we were desirable or not. And Anne Else talks about, the issue of brown Māori boys who were unwanted, and so they were, less likely to be adopted, more likely to end up in state care. So for my own journey, I think I'll always be, as reclaiming, and I'm doing that not just for me, but for my children, for their children. But no, very little support or acknowledgement, and so I've had to rely on peers. And I think there's still a little bit of surprise, I think, my own family was surprised that I would want to be Māori, that I would want to be part of that world. And so they've sort of, I guess, received an education throughout that as well. But they were very much colourblind, the discourses of the day. We don't notice race. Well, we actually do, but we pretend we don't. And what that means is that you should be happy. You should be content with not knowing who you are.
I would hate that. I don't think I could handle not knowing that kind of.
There's a lot of trauma, and so a lot of Māori adopted people that I know, there's real trauma, real pain at the core of that, not being acknowledged, not being accepted for who you are. And then also we do experience stigma, I think, sometimes in the Māori world, where we've not only grown up without our whakapapa, but we've been raised often by non-Māori as non-Māori. And so it can be a hard fit for us when we try and reconnect. with Te Ao Māori. So I've written a lot about that. I want to see change, and I think an important part of, I think for many of us with Apology, wanted to maybe hear from Māori as well. What do you have to say to those of us that were forgotten, that were disconnected? Where were our iwi? Who was reaching out for us? Who wants to claim us? And I think there's still a lot of healing to go there.
I guess my final question is, so out of what you can tell us, what next is the obvious question. As you've had the apology, you're waiting on the cabinet to come back. So what are your hopes out of that, and what next?
Yeah, I mean, I really hope that, and I know that, government is working with what we've produced. In our report, we have, I guess, made a series of recommendations about what we think is important for the redress system that will be established, the independent system that will be established. And core to that is the principle of survivor leadership. Because, we feel very strongly that nobody else can speak to this experience. And that's really important to inform what's set up. So I understand that work is happening, sort of going from our report and thinking about how that might be implemented, and to what extent what we recommended can be implemented. I would like to say I think it's positive that the government's announced that there'll be a National Remembrance Day. But I think, people positive about that, but also saying, well, come this time next year, November 12th, when there is that Remembrance Day for survivors, what will have changed? And so again, it's the expectations, I guess, raised now, that will mean something, and that there will be some significant action around that.
Anything else from you, Paul?
You want one final question for you. Obviously, we've had the apology. That's sort of a big marker moment for the whole process. What do you think the public should be aware of going forward for the next part of the process? Because obviously we only get snippets from the media and stuff like that. Those people who are involved are clearly deeply invested in what happens next. So yeah, I'm just kind of curious, what do you think the public should know about what happens next, or take on board when looking at this issue in the future?
I think that I guess at a very high level, I would like the general public to sort of to familiarise themselves, learn about this history. I do think that reading aspects of or parts of the Royal Commission report, it should be, well, certainly compulsory for some sort of helping professions. But I think there's a real coming to terms, reconciling kind of how we think of ourselves as a nation and this abhorrent history. And, we have to be brave, and we have to look at that, and we have to think about what are we going to do differently.
Thank you very much for everything, for the work that you've done on this, for sharing your story. It is really appreciated.
I think the other thing there are many survivor voices out there, and I'd really like to the broader survivor community, and I just encourage, keep listening, keep watching, keep attending to what's happening in this space.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Korua.
Wait, we're still here? It's over. Find another video.